Beneath the shadow of the unfinished Eiffel Tower, a young widow crosses paths with the man who destroyed her future. Her name is Madeleine Rousseau. His, Henri, the powerful magnate whose ambition cost her everything she once loved. But when truth and desire collide on the iron heart of Paris, vengeance begins to tremble before something far more dangerous: forgiveness. In this world of whispers, ink, and betrayal, one look could ignite redemption or ruin. Stay until the end to uncover the secret they both tried to bury. And if you love timeless stories of passion and courage, subscribe now. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and keep these romances alive for hearts like yours. Paris, 1892. The Eiffel Tower rose above Paris like a new kind of monument, not carved from marble or crowned with saints, but forged in iron and certainty. It stood where old Paris would have preferred lace and legend, and yet the city had already learned to live with it, the way people learn to live with grief. First by resisting, then by enduring, and finally by pretending it had always been there. On that pale afternoon, the sky was a soft winter grey, the kind that turned the Seine into polished steel and made every gas lamp seem warmer by comparison. Carriages rolled over damp cobblestones, their wheels whispering through puddles, while women in dark wool and fitted bodices moved carefully along the walkways, their skirts lifted just enough to spare the hems. Gentlemen passed with brisk steps, collars high, hats perfectly angled, their faces arranged into polite expressions that hid whatever truths they carried. Madeleine Rousseau walked beneath the tower's shadow as if she had no choice but to do so. She wore mourning black, not as a costume but as a second skin. The fitted wool bodice rose to her throat with a high collar, fastened with modest buttons that seemed to hold not only fabric, but years of restraint. Her sleeves were long and precise, her cuffs trimmed with matte black braid, and her gloves fit so neatly they looked like they had been sewn onto her hands. A small bonnet sat low on her chestnut hair, which was arranged in a disciplined chignon at the nape of her neck, as if disorder itself were an indulgence she could no longer afford. Only her eyes betrayed her, grey-blue, watchful, and too honest for the world she lived in. They moved over the crowd with the careful attention of someone who had learned that danger often arrived dressed in elegance. She kept her chin lifted, her shoulders straight, her steps measured. To anyone who glanced at her, she would appear composed, perhaps even cold, but beneath that composure lived a quiet war, between memory and survival, between what she had lost and what she refused to lose again. In her reticule, her fingers found the familiar edge of a folded paper, worn soft with time, pressed close like a secret that could still bleed. And beneath the fabric at her throat, the chain of a small locket rested against her skin, hidden, private, untouchable by anyone else. She was not here for amusement. She was here because Paris demanded payment for existence. A charitable exhibition had been arranged near the tower, an event meant to flatter the city's pride and soothe its conscience. Patrons of industry would be seen giving coins and smiles. Ladies of society would praise progress while avoiding the less graceful realities it produced. Madeleine had been hired to deliver a translation to a patron secretary, a small task that meant a small sum, and a small sum meant rent paid on time. Rent paid on time meant the difference between a room with a door that locked and a world that did not care what happened to a widow. The air smelled of cold stone, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart. A musician played somewhere nearby, the notes thin but persistent, like hope itself refusing to die completely. Madeleine stepped closer to the gathering, her gaze lowered, her presence meant to be unnoticed. That had become her greatest skill, to move through Paris without drawing attention, to breathe without demanding space, to exist without reminding anyone that she had once belonged to a life that had been torn away. Then the crowd shifted. A ripple of excitement traveled through the people like a gust of wind through a line of trees. Heads turned. Voices softened into reverent murmurs. Someone laughed in a way that sounded rehearsed, meant to be heard by the right ears. Madeleine felt it before she saw it, the subtle change in the air, as if the atmosphere itself had decided to make room. A procession approached. Men in tailored coats, a few women in rich fabrics and confident hats, and at the center of it all, a figure whose stillness made others orbit him as if pulled by gravity. Henri Beaumont. His name had been spoken in cafes and newspapers, in whispers and in praise, always accompanied by the same tone, admiration edged with fear. The kind reserved for men who could alter lives with a signature, who could raise a fortune or collapse one without ever stepping into the ruin they caused. He was taller than the men around him, his shoulders squared beneath a dark frock coat that fit him like authority. A black top hat sat perfectly on his dark hair, neatly parted and combed back with precision. The white of his collar was stark against the deep tones of his clothing, and a gold watch chain glinted faintly at his waistcoat, a detail so small yet so unmistakably deliberate. His face was composed, as if expression were a luxury he rarely permitted himself. Strong cheekbones, a firm mouth that seemed trained to give orders more often than apologies, and eyes, dark, steady, scanning the scene with the practiced awareness of a man who understood the power of being seen. Madeleine's breath stopped. For a single heartbeat, she thought her grief had turned into something physical, something capable of stepping out of the past and standing before her. Then his gaze found her. It was not a casual glance. It was not the indifferent sweep of a magnate acknowledging another shadow in the crowd. It was a sudden, unmistakable recognition that struck his face like a slap. Henri Beaumont went still. The world did not stop for him, but in that moment it looked as though it might have. The chatter around him continued, yet it sounded distant, muffled, as if the tower above had become a bell, and someone had struck it once, hard, and the vibration had entered Madeleine's bones. Madeleine's fingers tightened around her reticule until the fabric creased. She could feel the pulse in her throat, frantic against the collar that held her so carefully together. She should turn away. She should walk back into the crowd, vanish, become nothing again. But something sharper than fear rose within her, a force that had been waiting for years, trapped behind polite silence and the dull ache of survival. She stepped forward. Her skirts moved with her, heavy and controlled, the black fabric swallowing the light as if refusing to reflect it. People barely noticed at first, because Madeleine did not move like a woman seeking attention. She moved like a woman, walking toward a truth that had been denied. Henri's companions continued speaking, unaware of the shift that had occurred, until one of them glanced at Henri's face and faltered. Another followed the line of his gaze and frowned, as if trying to place the reason for his sudden silence. Madeleine stopped a few paces from him, close enough to see the faint tension at the corner of his mouth, close enough to feel the heat of his presence in the cold air. Henri removed his gloves with a controlled motion, as if his hands needed something to do. He held them loosely, his knuckles pale beneath the restraint. His voice, when it came, was low and careful. "Madame," the word struck her like an insult, and a recognition all at once. Madame, widow, a title that had replaced her name. Her eyes did not soften. "Do not pretend you do not know me." A silence fell between them, dense as velvet, and the people around them seemed to instinctively step away, sensing without understanding that something intimate and dangerous was unfolding. Henri's gaze searched her face as if he were reading a document he could not afford to misunderstand. Madeleine. Hearing her name from his mouth did something cruel to her chest. It pulled at the part of her that had once been young and foolish enough to believe Paris might allow happiness to last. She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to let him see the tremor that threatened her composure. "You look well, Monsieur Beaumont." His eyes flickered, the faintest flash of pain crossing his features before his control returned. "And you—" "Do not," she said, the words quiet but sharp. Do not offer me a compliment as if it could erase the past. Henri inhaled slowly, as if the air had become difficult. You never meant to ruin a man's life? Her voice did not rise, but it deepened, weighted with years of held-back fury. You never meant to destroy a home, a future, a name. A few heads turned now. A woman nearby paused mid-sentence. A gentleman's laugh died abruptly. The musician's melody continued, but even it sounded strained, as if it too had sensed the tension. Henri's jaw tightened. Madame Rousseau, my husband, Madeleine said, each word placed as carefully as a stone on a grave. Etienne Rousseau. Does the name mean anything to you, Monsieur Beaumont? Henri's composure cracked, not dramatically, not in a way that would satisfy an audience hungry for spectacle, but in a way far more telling. His gaze sharpened, his brow faintly furrowed, as if he were forcing his memory to open doors it had kept locked. The delay was all the answer she needed. No, she whispered, and the softness of the word made it more brutal. Of course it does not. Henri's voice came strained, controlled to the edge of breaking. I knew the company, I knew the acquisition, I knew there were losses. I did not know. You did not know he was my husband, she finished for him, the bitterness in her tone like cold ash. You did not know that the letters from creditors arrived like knives, that the friends who smiled at our table suddenly crossed the street to avoid us, that my husband began waking at night, staring at the ceiling as if it had become a courtroom that never adjourned. Henri did not interrupt. His eyes remained on her, and for the first time she saw something she had not expected. Not arrogance, not impatience, but an expression like guilt struggling for breath. Madeleine's gloved hand rose, not dramatically but with quiet precision, and she touched the high collar at her throat. When he died, Monsieur Beaumont, Paris said it was fate, illness, weakness. They used gentle words to keep their hands clean. Her gaze sharpened. But I knew the truth. Grief is not always a sickness. Sometimes it is a consequence. Henri's lips parted slightly, as if he meant to speak, but nothing came. His chest rose with a deeper breath, and when he finally found his voice, it was lower than before. Madeleine, I am sorry. Her laugh was barely a sound, more breath than humor. Sorry is what people say when they spill wine on a tablecloth. Henri's eyes darkened. Tell me what you want from me. The question should have satisfied her. For years she had imagined confronting him, imagined him pleading, imagined herself finally feeling relief. And yet standing there beneath the Iron Tower, with Paris moving around them as if their suffering were only another spectacle, Madeleine realized something terrifying. She did not know what she wanted. Justice, yes, but justice would not bring Etienne back. Revenge, perhaps, but revenge would still leave her alone, and beneath all of it, buried so deep she hated herself for it, there was a fragile, humiliating awareness of Henri Beaumont's nearness. The way his gaze held hers, as if he had forgotten the rest of the world. The way his voice, even now, spoke her name, as if it mattered. Madeleine forced her mind back to what was real. I want you to look at me, she said softly, her words cutting through the air with calm certainty. Not as a widow, not as an inconvenience. Look at what you left behind. Henri's throat moved as he swallowed. His gaze traveled over her mourning black, the disciplined lines of her posture, the tired strength around her eyes. He looked as if he were seeing the cost in a way he never had before. When he spoke, it sounded like truth dragged from a man who had learned to hide it. I did not know it would end like this. Madeleine stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faintest tremor in his hand where he held his gloves. Close enough that the scent of his cologne reached her, subtle, expensive, and strangely human. Yet it did, she whispered. For a moment, Henri looked as if he might reach for her, not with possession but with desperate restraint. His arm tensed, then stopped. His control returned like a shutter closing over a flame. Let me speak with you, he said, privately. Let me explain. Madeleine's eyes flashed. Explain what? Her voice softened, dangerously intimate. "Explain why the world always forgives men like you. Explain why a widow must carry the shame of a ruin she did not create." Henri's gaze did not leave hers. "Explain what I know. Explain what I did not know. And if there is something I can do—" "You cannot undo death," Madeleine said, and the sentence seemed to hang between them like a vow. A carriage passed nearby, splashing water against the curb. Somewhere a woman giggled too brightly, as if laughter could keep sorrow away. The tower above them stood unmoved, iron and indifferent. Madeleine drew back, her heart pounding with the violence of restrained feeling. She had come here for a transaction, for work, for survival. Instead, she had collided with the past. Henri's voice followed her, quieter now, stripped of pride. "Madeleine, please." She paused, just long enough to let the words settle into her bones. Then she turned her head slightly, not fully facing him, offering only the sharp line of her profile. "If you ever truly regret what you did," she said, "do not ask me for forgiveness today." Henri did not speak. Madeleine took a breath that felt like swallowing cold air and memory. She walked away into the crowd, her black skirts moving like a closing curtain, her posture unwavering. Even as her chest tightened with pain, she refused to display. Behind her, Henri Beaumont remained beneath the Eiffel Tower's shadow, surrounded by admirers who suddenly felt distant, holding in his hands a pair of gloves as if they were the only thing keeping him from breaking. And for the first time in years, Madeleine Rousseau felt something she had trained herself never to feel again. Not hope, not peace, but the dangerous certainty that her life had just changed, because the man who ruined her future had looked into her eyes and finally, truly, seen her. The following morning arrived clothed in the soft grey mist that so often lingered over Paris before winter truly declared itself. A pale sun filtered through lace curtains, washing the modest room on Rue de la Madeleine in a fragile light that seemed afraid to touch anything too deeply. Madeleine Rousseau sat by the small table near the window, her posture as impeccable as ever, her hands resting over a folded letter that bore no seal, only her name written in careful, masculine script. It had arrived an hour earlier, delivered by a boy who had bowed awkwardly, unsure whether the woman before him was a servant or a lady. She had tipped him with what little she could spare, then held the letter in her gloved hand for several long minutes before breaking the wax. Now it lay open before her. The words were precise, formal, and yet they trembled with restraint. "Madame Rousseau, forgive this intrusion. There are truths that must not remain silent. If you would grant me the grace of a meeting, I shall come unaccompanied, and in full respect of your wishes. Choose the time and the place. I will abide by both." Henri Beaumont. Her heart had betrayed her the moment she recognized his handwriting. Bold, even strokes that belonged to a man accustomed to authority. It angered her that such details could still move her, that even ink on paper could stir something she believed long buried. She folded the letter with deliberate calm, but her pulse defied her composure. Outside, the street echoed with the distant rumble of carriage wheels and the rhythmic tapping of horseshoes. Paris was awakening, proud and indifferent, unaware that within this modest apartment a woman battled memories sharp enough to wound twice. By noon, she had decided. Not because forgiveness tempted her, no. She had no intention of granting that, but because silence was a prison she had inhabited long enough. If she did not face him now, he would linger in her thoughts like an unfinished sentence. She chose the Café des Artistes, a public place near the Boulevard Saint-Germain where privacy could hide in the noise. There, among the chatter of artists and merchants, no one would dare whisper scandal. And if he arrived late, as men of power often did, she could simply stand and leave, taking her dignity with her. When she entered the café that afternoon, the soft chime of the door drew a few curious glances. She wore the same restraint she always did, a dark grey walking gown trimmed with jet beads, her bonnet pinned firmly in place, her gloves smooth and spotless. Her beauty was not the radiant kind that demanded admiration, but the solemn grace that silenced rooms. Henri Beaumont was already there. He rose at once from his corner table, the movement unhurried but precise. He wore a dark frock coat and a waistcoat of charcoal silk. The faint gleam of a watch chain caught the light when he straightened. He removed his hat and held it at his side, bowing slightly in a gesture of respect that made her throat tighten against her will. "Madame Rousseau," he said quietly. "Mr. Beaumont." She inclined her head just enough to acknowledge him, nothing more. He gestured toward the chair opposite his. "I'm grateful you came." Her voice was calm, measured. "Do not be grateful. I am here to listen, not to console." He accepted the rebuke with a faint nod. When she sat, he waited until she adjusted her gloves before speaking again, as though even her smallest movement commanded his attention. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "I learned more last night than I had the courage to face before." "Then face it now," she said. "Say what you came to say, and let us both be free of this." Henri's gaze softened, though his hands remained still on the table. "When I acquired the company that bore your husband's name, I believed it was a simple matter of business. I knew the firm was failing. I did not know that it was tied to you." Madeleine held his eyes with quiet defiance. "Do you think the absence of knowledge absolves the presence of harm?" His expression faltered. "No, it does not." "Then you understand more than most." A waiter approached and set down 2 cups of steaming coffee. Neither touched them. The rich scent mingled with the faint perfume of Madeleine's lavender soap, creating an intimacy so delicate it felt accidental. Henri exhaled slowly. "I cannot undo what has been done, but I would at least offer—" "Money?" she interrupted, her tone like frost. "A check written with the same pen that destroyed my husband's livelihood. I would offer restitution," he said, his voice firm but not defensive. "Not to erase, but to amend." "Amend?" She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "You speak as though my life were a document with errors to be corrected." Henri's eyes lowered briefly, then returned to hers. "What would you have me do, Madeleine?" Her name on his lips, spoken without title, without distance, stirred something she despised herself for feeling. It carried warmth where she wanted only coldness. She steadied her breath. "You can begin," she said softly, "by not calling me by that name." He inclined his head. "Forgive me." The words fell between them, honest yet fragile, as though he himself doubted he had any right to speak them. For a moment, silence reigned. Outside, laughter drifted in from the street. A woman passed by, her perfume trailing the memory of violets. Paris continued to breathe while these 2 souls remained caught in the suspended quiet of consequence. At last, Henri spoke again. "When I first saw you yesterday, I thought perhaps grief had played a trick on me. I have spent years convincing myself that some faces are better forgotten." "You remember me?" she said, not as a question but as an accusation. "I do," he confessed. "I remember your husband's name, your eyes, the day you stood beside him at a printing exhibition. You smiled as though the world were kind. I thought of you for weeks after. Then the acquisition came to my desk, and I signed what I did not read carefully enough." Madeleine's gaze did not waver. "And so you remember me as an inconvenience you once admired?" He flinched slightly, but she noticed. "No," he said, "as the proof that success gained without mercy leaves nothing worth having." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since he entered her life again, she felt the weight of his remorse. Not the performance of a guilty man, but the quiet ache of one who had finally looked inward. She turned her face away, pretending to study the people in the cafe. The truth was that she feared what might happen if she met his gaze too long. The warmth between them was dangerous, born of shared pain and something older, unnamed. Henri spoke again, his voice lower now, almost tender. "You must believe me, Madame Rousseau. I did not know the depth of what was lost. I came today not to justify myself, but to hear what punishment you wish to give me." She faced him slowly, astonished. "Punishment?" He nodded once. "If that is what I deserve, Name it. For a fleeting second she almost pitied him, but pity was too close to forgiveness, and she had promised herself she would not cross that line. "I am not your judge, Mr. Beaumont," she said at last. "You will have to live with your own conscience. I already live with mine." He leaned forward slightly, unable to keep the urgency from his tone. "Then allow me to do something, anything, to ease what I have caused." "Do not insult me with the idea that I can be eased," she whispered. "Some wounds heal only when we stop reopening them with apologies." Their eyes met again, and for an instant, something in her steadiness wavered. She could not deny the strange gravity that drew her toward him, the same magnetic pull that had existed years ago when she had watched him from across crowded salons, never imagining that admiration would one day turn to enmity. Henri seemed to sense it too. He did not reach for her hand, but his fingers brushed lightly against the edge of her glove as he gestured. The touch was accidental, fleeting, yet the air shifted between them. Madeleine's pulse quickened. She drew her hand back slowly, pretending to adjust her cuff. "Do not make the mistake of thinking regret is affection," she said. He smiled faintly, sad and knowing. "And do not make the mistake of thinking hatred is freedom." The words unsettled her. "You presume to understand me." "I am trying to," he answered simply. "It is the least I owe you." They sat in silence again, two souls entangled by history, pride, and the faint hum of something that refused to die. At last, Madeleine stood, her chair scraping softly against the tiled floor. "I have heard enough." Henri rose immediately. "Will you allow me to call upon you again?" "No." She fastened her glove buttons with quiet finality. "If you wish to make amends, do it without dragging me into the spectacle. Restore what you can to those still living. My husband is beyond your reach." Henri hesitated. "And you?" She looked at him for a long, steady moment, her eyes luminous with emotions she would not name. "I'm not asking to be restored." He bowed slightly, defeated and reverent all at once. "Then I will not impose again. But should you ever need—" She cut him off gently. "You have already given me what I needed, Mr. Beaumont. The truth. That will be enough." She turned and walked toward the door. As she passed the window, the afternoon light caught the faint shimmer of her veil, outlining her figure against the grey Parisian sky. Henri watched her go, his throat tightening as if words still unsaid pressed against his ribs. When she reached the door, she paused, sensing his gaze upon her. Without looking back, she said quietly, "Do not send letters. Do not seek me. If fate insists on crossing our paths again, it will not be by your design." Then she stepped out into the pale light, the cold air wrapping around her like a reminder that the past, though silenced, was never gone. Henri remained motionless for several moments after she left. The untouched coffee before him had gone cold, its surface trembling slightly from the vibrations of the city outside. He stared at it as though it might offer answers, but the only thing he heard was her voice, echoing softly in his memory. "You cannot undo death." He rose at last, placing a few coins on the table, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. When he stepped into the street, the wind lifted the brim of his hat and scattered a few stray leaves between them. Two people walking in opposite directions through the same city, bound by something neither could yet name. As the iron tower loomed in the distance, glinting faintly through the fog, Henri Beaumont made a silent vow he dared not speak aloud. He would not let her disappear again, not until she knew the truth that still hid beneath the ashes of what he had destroyed. And somewhere, though she would not admit it, Madeleine felt that vow in her chest like an unspoken echo, unwelcome, undeniable, and far too close to the sound of her own heart. The rain had fallen through most of the night, a fine, ceaseless drizzle that seemed determined to wash away even the memory of sunlight. By morning, the streets of Paris gleamed under a silver haze, and the air carried that quiet chill that made the city's chimneys breathe in unison. From her window on Rue de la Madeleine, Madeleine Rousseau watched droplets gather on the glass and slide down like tiny mirrored ghosts, blurring the outlines of the world beyond. The small apartment smelled faintly of lavender, soap and ink. A few papers lay scattered across her writing desk, a translation she had promised to deliver by evening. Yet her concentration faltered. Each sentence she copied dissolved into the same restless thought. Henri Beaumont's face, his voice, the gravity of his apology. She had told herself their meeting meant nothing, that she had gone to that cafe to close a wound, not reopen it. But the truth whispered differently in the stillness of her room. It lingered in the tremor that returned to her hands when she recalled the way he had said her name, as if it had cost him something to speak it. When the knock came, it startled her. She froze, her pen suspended above the paper. Few people called at this hour. Rent collectors came in the afternoon. Neighbors preferred gossip from a safe distance. Gathering her composure, she opened the door just enough to see a young boy standing there, his coat too large for him, a folded note clutched in his small red hands. "For Madame Rousseau," he said, holding it out. She took it, uncertain whether to thank or scold him for intruding so early. By the time she glanced back, he was already darting down the stairs. The paper bore no seal, only a neat, familiar handwriting. "Madame, forgive the impropriety of this delivery. I have uncovered a matter that concerns your husband's business, something neither of us understood before. If you would allow me 10 minutes of your time, I shall explain it in full. I will call at 3 o'clock, unless you forbid me. H.B." Madeleine stood in the doorway for several seconds after reading, her breath shallow, her mind a tangle of defiance and curiosity. The sensible part of her whispered that she should burn the note, lock the door, and never let Henri Beaumont cross her threshold. But another voice, quieter, older, urged her to listen. The past had already taken so much. Perhaps the truth could not hurt her more than ignorance had. By 3 o'clock, the light outside had dimmed again. The street below was still damp, and the scent of rain clung to the air. Madeleine had changed into a dark blue dress, modest but well-fitted, her hair drawn into its usual chignon, her locket hidden beneath the collar. Her appearance was simple, her resolve less so. When the knock came again, she did not hesitate. Henri stood on the landing, hat in hand, his coat marked by the faint mist of the street. He looked every inch the gentleman, composed, immaculate, yet somehow different from the man she remembered beneath the tower. His eyes, once guarded by habit, carried a shadow of uncertainty. "Madame Rousseau," he said softly, "may I come in?" She stepped aside. For 10 minutes. He entered, careful not to let his boots soil the floor. His gaze moved over the room, a small table by the window, a shelf of worn books, a vase holding a single dried rose. It was the home of a woman who had learned to live quietly, but with dignity. "Please sit," she said, gesturing toward the chair near the hearth. Henri obeyed, setting his hat on his knee. "I thank you for receiving me." "I am not certain yet that I should have," she replied. "You wrote of a discovery." He nodded and withdrew a folded document from his coat pocket. "I found this in my company archives, records from the acquisition of Rousseau Press. I studied them last night. There are inconsistencies I cannot ignore." She accepted the document, but did not open it immediately. Her fingers brushed the paper lightly. "Inconsistencies. There is a signature," he said. "Mine. But it appears on a contract I never signed. It authorizes the seizure of assets, the immediate closure of the press, and a clause that stripped your husband of ownership rights entirely. That document was never placed before me." Madeleine's brows knit together, disbelief flickering across her features. "You expect me to believe that someone forged your name?" "I expect nothing," he answered calmly. "Only that you see the proof yourself." She unfolded the document. The ink was faded but legible, the handwriting neat and decisive. Her husband's name appeared near the bottom, next to a date she would never forget. And above it, Henri Beaumont's signature. She looked up at him sharply. "It is your hand," she said. "It is not," he replied, his tone steady but low. Look closely, the loop of the B, the angle of the final stroke. It is close, but not exact. I compared it to my ledgers. This was imitated by someone with access to my correspondence. Madeleine's heart began to beat faster. Who would have done such a thing? Henri's jaw tightened. A man I once trusted, Lucien Marceau. He oversaw several of my business dealings at the time. I recall questioning some of his methods, but I did not yet understand how far his reach extended. She let the document fall to her lap. You accuse him now, because it is convenient. Henri's gaze met hers, unflinching. I accuse him because it is true, and because I have spent the last years believing that my ambition cost a man his life. If there is even a chance that deceit was the root of it, then I must uncover it. Madeleine rose abruptly, pacing toward the window. The glass reflected her pale face, framed by the Paris dusk. You speak of uncovering, she murmured, as if that would undo the nights my husband spent awake, counting debts he could never repay, as if it would erase the whispers that followed me through every corridor of this city. Henri stood as well, his voice low but urgent. No truth can undo pain, but perhaps it can end the lie that chained it to your name. She turned to face him. Their eyes locked, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the faint crackle of the fire. What is it you want from me? She asked quietly. I want to give you the truth, he said, and perhaps, if you allow it, the peace that comes from knowing your husband was not ruined by chance or weakness, but by treachery. Her lips trembled slightly before she caught them firm again. Peace, she repeated. Do you think such a thing still exists for me? Henri took a careful step closer. If it does, Madame Rousseau, I would help you find it. The way he said it, without arrogance, without pity, pierced her composure. His closeness stirred something she wished she could silence. She stepped back until the edge of the table touched her hip, a physical barrier between them. You should leave, she said softly, before I begin to believe that you mean what you say. Henri hesitated. And if I do mean it, then I am the greater fool for listening. He inclined his head slightly, the shadow of a sad smile crossing his face. Perhaps we are both fools then. Her eyes softened, but only for an instant. You came for 10 minutes, Mr. Beaumont. They are past. He did not argue. Instead, he placed a small envelope on the table. Inside are copies of the contracts I found. Keep them. You may need them more than I. When she did not reach for it, he turned to leave. As he reached the door, she spoke again, her voice low but trembling with something new, something fragile and dangerous. If what you claim is true, she said, then the man you accuse destroyed more than one life. He destroyed a name that once meant honesty. Henri paused, his back still to her. Then let us rebuild it, he said quietly. Together, if you can bear it. She said nothing, and he did not look back. After the door closed, the apartment fell into a silence so complete that the ticking of the small clock on her mantel sounded like thunder. Madeleine pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart raced, furious at her for the weakness it betrayed, but when she turned toward the envelope, curiosity won over caution. Inside lay 3 documents and a small visiting card, Henri's name embossed in gold, the address of his office printed below. At the bottom in his handwriting, a single line, I will find proof of this deception, with or without permission, but I would rather do so with your trust. Her throat tightened. She told herself it was only strategy that made her read the papers until the candle burned low. Yet as she traced the forged signature with her fingertip, she felt the faintest shift inside her, like the first breath after too long beneath water. The next morning dawned brighter. As if Paris itself had chosen to be merciful, Madeleine delivered her translation to a publisher near the Boulevard des Italiens, then lingered outside, unwilling to return home too soon. Her path led her past the shopfront of a milliner's, where 2 women whispered behind their fans about a scandal in the industrial district. She caught a name, Marceau, and paused. heart quickening. Inside the shop, laughter rang, brittle and knowing. She did not enter, but she stood long enough to confirm that rumor traveled faster than truth in Paris. Later that afternoon, as the sun slipped behind the chimneys, a figure appeared on her doorstep again. But it was not Henri. It was Clémence Valérie, elegantly dressed, her smile polished to perfection. "My dear Madame Rousseau," she said, her tone sweet as honey and sharp as glass, "how extraordinary to find you here. I hear you had quite the encounter at the tower the other day." Madeleine's expression cooled. "News travels quickly among those with nothing better to do." Clémence's laugh tinkled like crystal. "Indeed, but do be careful, chère amie. Paris is never kind to women who catch a powerful man's attention, no matter the reason." Madeleine met her gaze evenly. "Then perhaps Paris should learn kindness." Clémence's eyes glinted with amusement. "Perhaps, or perhaps women like us should learn how to survive without it." With a nod that felt both cordial and warning, Clémence departed, her perfume lingering in the stairwell like a promise of trouble. Madeleine closed the door slowly, leaning her forehead against the wood. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, marking the hour. She did not know what awaited her next, truth or ruin. But as she looked once more at Henri's documents on her table, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The past was not finished with her. And neither, it seemed, was Henri Beaumont. The city glittered that night like a promise. Paris, bathed in the amber glow of gas lamps, seemed to pulse with anticipation. Carriages rolled over wet cobblestones, carrying ladies in silks and gentlemen in polished shoes toward the Hôtel Valérie, where society would gather for the most awaited ball of the season. Inside, chandeliers rained gold upon marble floors, and the orchestra tuned their instruments with the same reverence given to prayer. The air smelled of roses, champagne, and secrets. Madeleine Rousseau stood in her modest apartment, facing the mirror that had belonged to her mother. The reflection that looked back at her was one she scarcely recognized. The widow who had once hidden in shadows now prepared to walk into a room filled with people who whispered her name behind gloved hands. The invitation had come earlier that afternoon, delivered by a young messenger bearing Clémence Valérie's elegant handwriting. "It is time," the note had said. "Come and be seen, my dear. Paris forgets the invisible." Madeleine had hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to remain in the safety of anonymity. Yet something within her, perhaps pride, perhaps defiance, had urged her to accept. If the world would gossip, let it at least speak of her on her own terms. She chose her attire with care, a gown of deep mourning black, softened by a subtle sheen of satin that caught the candlelight when she moved. The bodice was fitted and precise, the neckline modest, the sleeves long and close to her wrists. A single jet brooch fastened at her collar, and her hair, arranged in a low chignon, was adorned only by a small black ribbon. No jewels, no color, only dignity. When the carriage arrived, the city was a blur of light through the mist. Madeleine pressed her gloved hands together in her lap, steadying herself as the wheels clattered through the narrow streets. The closer they came to the Hôtel Valérie, the more the air shimmered with laughter and the distant sound of violins. Inside, the ballroom was a living dream. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like constellations above the dancers, and walls of gold-trimmed mirrors reflected the swirl of color. Gowns in ivory, emerald and rose, the flicker of jewels, the flutter of fans. Gentlemen stood in clusters, speaking of industry and politics with the same tone they used for flirtation. Servants glided silently among them, trays heavy with champagne and sugared fruits, and then, amid the glittering chaos, Henri Beaumont appeared. He was speaking to a diplomat when his gaze found her across the room. For a moment, he seemed to forget conversation entirely. His expression changed, not with surprise but with something quieter, deeper. The controlled certainty of the businessman dissolved into something unguarded, almost tender. Madeleine felt his stare before she truly met it. The moment their eyes locked, the room seemed to dim around them. She told herself she would not be moved, but her heartbeat betrayed her composure. The memory of their last conversation returned unbidden. The closeness, the restrained emotion, the letter that still lay hidden among her papers. Clémence approached her with the confident grace of a woman born to be observed. Her gown shimmered in shades of lilac and gold, and diamonds trembled at her ears with every tilt of her head. "My dear," she said, her voice low and amused, "you have the entire room wondering who you are. Paris does love a mystery." "Paris loves to devour it, you mean?" Madeleine replied softly. Clémence laughed, looping her arm through Madeleine's. "Then let it. You wear your mourning like armor. It suits you far too well." "Armor is sometimes necessary." Clémence gave her a knowing smile. "Perhaps. But armor cannot dance." Before Madeleine could respond, the orchestra began the opening waltz. Couples moved gracefully into position, the swirl of skirts and coats creating a storm of color and sound. Henri remained where he was for a moment longer, as though weighing something unseen, and then he began to cross the floor toward her. The crowd seemed to part for him without realizing it. When he reached her, he bowed, deeply, properly, but with an intensity that made her breath falter. "Madame Rousseau," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Would you grant me this dance?" She hesitated, her heart caught between defiance and curiosity. To accept would invite whispers, to refuse would reveal that she still cared. Her lips curved slightly, though her eyes remained distant. "Do men like you ever tire of spectacle, Monsieur Beaumont?" "Every day," he said, his tone serious. "Tonight, I would rather dance than perform." There was sincerity in his gaze and something more, something that pulled at her like a tide. Against her better judgment, she placed her gloved hand in his. The orchestra began to play. Henri's hand settled gently at her waist, guiding her into motion. The rhythm was slow, the steps deliberate, and for a time the world beyond their movement ceased to exist. The scent of his cologne, subtle and clean, mingled with the faint fragrance of her lavender soap. When he looked down at her, his expression was unreadable, yet his eyes spoke volumes. "You should not be here," she murmured. "Neither should you," he answered, "and yet here we are." "Paris thrives on cruelty," she said quietly. "It feeds on stories like ours." "Then let it choke on this one," he replied. Her gaze flickered upward, meeting his. "You speak as if you can rewrite what has already been written." "Perhaps I can," he said, "or perhaps I simply refuse to let others decide the ending." For one suspended moment, their steps slowed. The music swelled around them, but they moved as if caught in another rhythm entirely, the rhythm of a glance, a breath, the memory of what might have been. When the waltz ended, he released her hand reluctantly. The applause that followed seemed far away. Madeleine inclined her head in silent farewell, but before she could step back, another voice interrupted. "Ah, Beaumont," said Lucien Marceau, his tone smooth as polished marble. "I see your taste in business is only rivaled by your taste in company." Henri stiffened. The older man's smile was the kind that concealed knives. He was impeccably dressed, his cravat tied with precision, his ring catching the light as he raised his glass. His eyes, pale and watchful, slid to Madeleine with mock civility. "And Madame Rousseau," he continued, "I had not expected to see you among such forgiving company. Society is merciful after all." Madeleine's spine straightened, her chin lifting. "Mercy, Monsieur Marceau, is a quality I've never observed in society, or in business." Lucien's smile deepened. "Touché." He turned to Henri. "You always did have a talent for reviving lost causes, my friend. Be careful that your generosity does not become your ruin." Henri's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "Some ruins are worth rebuilding." Lucien chuckled. "Ah, yes. Sentiment, the one luxury money cannot purchase." He raised his glass to them in mock salute and walked away, leaving behind a faint scent of tobacco and contempt. Madeleine's hands trembled slightly, though she hid it by adjusting her glove. "So that is the man," she said quietly. Henri nodded, his jaw tight. "The man whose lies carry the weight of my name." "You despise him," she observed. "I do," he said, "and not only for what he did, but for what I allowed him to do." His confession hung between them, raw and unguarded. She wanted to look away, but her gaze remained locked on his. "You are not the only one who carries guilt, Madame Rousseau," he continued. "Some of us wear it without the comfort of black silk." The words struck her harder than he intended. She turned, her voice quiet but firm. "Then carry it with silence, Monsieur Beaumont. The world already watches us too closely." He bowed his head slightly. "As you wish." Yet as she walked away toward the terrace, Henri's eyes followed her. The crowd, the music, even the laughter seemed distant, hollow. He watched her disappear through the tall glass doors and felt the same ache that had haunted him since the day they met again beneath the Eiffel Tower, a mixture of remorse and longing he could neither silence nor name. Outside, the terrace offered a breath of cold air and solitude. Paris stretched before her in flickering gaslight, the rooftops silvered by the moon. Madeleine leaned against the stone balustrade, her fingers curling around its edge as she tried to steady her thoughts. "Does he ruin every evening he attends?" came a voice from behind. She turned. Henri stood in the doorway, the glow from the ballroom behind him casting his face half in shadow, half in gold. "You should not follow me," she said softly, "and yet I cannot seem to help it. People will talk." "They already do," he replied. "Let them waste their breath." She shook her head. "You think defiance is strength, but in this world, defiance is a luxury only men can afford." He approached slowly, his voice lowering. "Then tell me what I can do to change that." "Nothing," she said, though her tone faltered. "You cannot change what society refuses to see." "Perhaps not," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I can see you." The words were simple, but they landed like a confession. Madeleine's breath caught. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, brushing it across her cheek. Without thinking, Henri reached up, his fingers stopping inches away from her face, as if the air itself had become sacred. "You should not," she whispered. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but I already do." Their eyes met, and in that suspended moment, every restraint, every rule of propriety seemed fragile and far away. The city murmured below them, the violins carried faintly from inside, but the only sound that mattered was the silence between their breaths. Then, with the quiet discipline that defined her, Madeleine stepped back. "Do not mistake compassion for forgiveness," she said. Henri's expression remained calm, but the flicker of pain in his eyes betrayed him. "And do not mistake remorse for love," he replied. Her voice softened, trembling despite her will. "Love is not born of remorse. It is buried by it." The music swelled again inside the ballroom, the next dance beginning. Henri straightened his shoulders, reclaiming the armor of composure that society demanded. "Then we are both buried, madame," he said quietly. She turned her face toward the city lights. "No, Monsieur Beaumont, I intend to rise again." When she left the terrace, her heart was unsteady, her pulse still echoing with the memory of his gaze. Henri remained where she had stood, looking out over Paris. The night air bit at his skin, but he did not move. Somewhere below, the Seine reflected the moonlight in trembling ripples, like the truth itself, elusive and deep. And in that moment, Henri Beaumont knew that whatever battle he had begun was no longer against business or reputation. It was against the silence that had ruled both their hearts for too long. The dawn came pale and uncertain, its first light filtering through gauzy curtains and falling across the polished surface of Henri Beaumont's desk. His study was a cathedral of order, shelves of ledgers aligned with military precision, the scent of tobacco faintly mingling with paper and ink. Yet this morning, Henri could not find solace in his empire of organization. He stood by the window, coat unbuttoned, eyes fixed on the grey horizon where the rooftops of Paris met the smoke of industry. The previous night's encounter at the Valerie ball lingered in him like a fever that would not break. He had watched her, Madeleine Rousseau, move through that glittering crowd with the dignity of a woman who no longer feared humiliation. Her words, sharp as the edge of truth, had stripped him bare. He had seen pity in her eyes, but never surrender. Now, as the clock chimed 8, Henri pressed a hand against his desk and breathed deeply. The documents before him, proof of forged contracts, letters from Lucien Marceau, blurred together. None of it mattered as much as the image that haunted him. Madeleine's gloved hand trembling slightly as she left him on that terrace, her composure crumbling for only a second before she rebuilt it with quiet defiance. He could not let her vanish again into that quiet life of shadows. By mid-morning, the decision was made. He would call upon her, not as the magnate who had once destroyed her husband's livelihood, but as a man seeking redemption through truth. He ordered his carriage without hesitation, though he knew the impropriety of such a visit. Society would whisper, Clémence Valérie would smile her knowing smile. None of that mattered. Meanwhile, on Rue de la Madeleine, Madeleine herself sat by the window with a cup of untouched tea. The city outside was waking, vendors shouting, horses clattering, but she felt detached from it all. Her thoughts wandered back to the night before. The dance, Henri's hand steady at her waist, his words on the terrace that had felt perilously close to confession. She had told herself it was only curiosity that made her listen, but deep inside, something else had taken root. A dangerous warmth she did not want to name. She touched the locket at her throat, the small silver one she always wore beneath her high collar. Her fingers found it instinctively, tracing its familiar shape. Inside was the last thing she had of her husband, a miniature portrait and a folded scrap of paper that had yellowed with time. She never opened it any more. The words, written in Etienne's steady hand, had once offered comfort. Now they carried a weight she could scarcely bear. A knock at the door pulled her back from her thoughts. When she opened it, Henri Beaumont stood on the threshold, the morning light glinting off his dark coat. He removed his hat immediately, his expression composed, but his eyes betraying the strain of the night. "Madame Rousseau," he said quietly, "forgive the intrusion. I would not have come if it were not important." Madeleine hesitated. The proper response caught in her throat. "You should not be here." "Perhaps not," he admitted. "But I could not stay away knowing what I know." Her pulse quickened. "Then speak, monsieur. Say what you must and go." He inclined his head slightly. "May I come in?" She hesitated only a moment longer before stepping aside. The small room felt even smaller now, filled by his presence and the tension that hung between them. Henri glanced around with quiet respect. The books neatly stacked, the embroidery framed by the window, the faint scent of lavender and ink. "I have found more proof," he began. "Marceau's signature appears in documents he claimed were mine. He profited from the collapse of Rousseau Press and concealed it behind my name. I have already begun inquiries to expose him." Madeleine folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "And what then? You expose him, and suddenly the dead rise from their graves. Justice does not breathe life into the lost, Monsieur Beaumont." "I know," he said softly, "but it can breathe dignity into those who remain." Her composure faltered. She turned away, her eyes finding the rain-specked window. "Dignity," she repeated. "That word means little to a woman who has been whispered about in markets and avoided by her own neighbors." Henri took a step closer. "And yet you stand here, unbroken. Dignity is all I see." The words struck something deep within her. She looked at him sharply, ready to answer with bitterness, but the warmth in his eyes disarmed her. For the first time, she saw not the powerful man who had once unknowingly destroyed her life, but the one who seemed willing to destroy his own reputation to make amends. "Why do you care so much?" she asked suddenly. "What is it you hope to gain from this?" Henri's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Peace, perhaps, redemption, and—" His words faltered. And the chance to know that I did not lose the only woman whose opinion ever mattered to me. Her breath caught, sharp and unsteady. Do not say that. It is the truth. You have no right to speak of affection, she said, her voice trembling. Not to me. He stepped forward, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, though not a single line of propriety was crossed. Then forgive the words, he murmured, but not their meaning. For a heartbeat, the silence between them thickened, charged with everything neither dared to say. Madeleine's fingers went once more to her locket. She held it tightly, as if it might anchor her to the past she was losing control of. Henri's gaze followed the movement. You wear it always, he said softly. Was it his? She nodded. It is all I have left. May I see it? Her instinct was to refuse, but something in his tone, gentle, almost reverent, made her relent. Slowly she unfastened the clasp and held it out to him. Henri took it carefully, as if he feared it might shatter in his hand. He turned it over, tracing the faint engraving on the back. The initials, E.R. Yes, Etienne Rousseau. He opened it with delicate precision. Inside, the miniature portrait stared back. A kind face, fine features, eyes filled with quiet intelligence. Opposite it, a folded scrap of paper rested behind the glass. Henri glanced up questioningly. A note, she said quietly. The last thing he wrote before he... She paused, her throat tightening. Before the end. Henri's voice softened. May I ask what it says? She hesitated. No one had read it but her. Yet something in Henri's gaze, the same steadiness that once commanded boardrooms, felt now like an anchor in the storm. She nodded faintly. She removed the fragile paper and unfolded it. The ink was faded, but the words still breathed sorrow and devotion. My dearest Madeleine, if the world should take from me all that I have built, know that I did not fall from lack of love, but from too much faith in men who knew none. If I have failed you, forgive me. There are truths I cannot speak, but one remains. The hand that signs my ruin may not be the hand I feared. Look beyond the ink. Madeleine's eyes glistened as she read. When she finished, her voice trembled. He wrote this the night before he died. I thought he meant fate or despair. But now, those words, look beyond the ink, they sound like a warning. Henri's expression darkened. Then he must have known Marceau's deceit. The weight of it settled between them. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the city and the slow tick of the clock on her mantel. Finally, Henri said, I will clear his name. I swear it. Madeleine looked up, her eyes wide, luminous with disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. And what of yours? Exposing Marceau will ruin you. Then so be it, he said simply. There are worse fates than ruin. Her voice softened, trembling. And what of me, Monsieur Beaumont? What happens when you tear open the past again? I have built my life from its ashes. Do you mean to scatter them once more? He stepped closer still, his hand hovering near hers, but never touching. No, I mean to keep the wind from taking them. The words stole her breath. For an instant, she could see the man he might have been, the one not shaped by ambition or pride, but by something purer, unguarded. She turned away before he could see the tears forming in her eyes. You speak as though the world would forgive us both. Henri's voice grew quiet. I do not need the world's forgiveness, only yours. The confession hung in the air, tender and unadorned. Madeleine's heart ached with its sincerity. She wanted to hate him still. It would have been easier. But the hatred she had carried for so long had begun to crumble beneath the weight of his remorse. At last, she whispered, I cannot promise forgiveness, not yet. Then I will wait, he said. She faced him then, meeting his gaze fully. Do not wait for me, Monsieur Beaumont. You may discover that I am not the woman you remember. Henri's eyes softened. Then let me discover who you have become. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance. A storm was gathering over Paris, heavy and slow, the kind that brought both fear and renewal. Henri fastened the locket's clasp once more and placed it gently back into her hand. "Keep this safe," he said. "It holds more truth than either of us knew." Their fingers brushed as he released it, a fleeting touch but charged with meaning. The silence that followed was unbearable in its sweetness and restraint. When he finally turned to leave, Madeleine did not stop him. She stood by the window, watching as his figure disappeared down the street, swallowed by the approaching rain. Her hand still clutched the locket, warm from his touch, and for the first time in years she felt something shift within her, not forgiveness, not love, but the faint awakening of possibility. And as thunder rolled softly over the city, she whispered into the stillness, "Look beyond the ink." In that moment, Paris itself seemed to listen, the rain beginning to fall, slow and steady, like the first notes of a requiem that might yet become a love song. The storm that had threatened Paris the night before had finally broken, washing the city clean in the fragile light of morning. Cobblestones gleamed like dark glass, and the air smelled of wet iron and damp roses from the gardens along the boulevard Saint-Germain. The rhythm of carriage wheels over puddles echoed softly through the streets, as though the city itself was trying to remember how to breathe after the rain. Madeleine Rousseau stepped outside her building with a shawl draped over her shoulders and a sealed envelope in her hand. She was on her way to deliver a translation, determined to occupy her mind with work. But the air carried an odd tension, those small silences that precede misfortune. She felt it in the way the newspaper vendors lingered at corners, their voices sharper than usual, their stacks of freshly printed pages fluttering in the breeze like restless wings. "Morning edition, Beaumont scandal," one of them cried. Madeleine froze mid-step. For a second she believed she had misheard, but when she turned, the bold black letters screamed at her from the front page of Le Courrier de Paris. "Industrialist Henri Beaumont, entangled with mysterious widow." Her fingers trembled as she took the paper from the boy's hand. Beneath the headline, a paragraph spun its venom with elegant cruelty. Sources close to the Beaumont firm reveal a recent connection between the magnate and a widow once associated with the late Etienne Rousseau, whose business downfall preceded his tragic death. Witnesses claim to have seen the lady and Mr. Beaumont in intimate conversation on several occasions. The public wonders whether compassion or calculation binds them. The words blurred for a moment as anger rose to her throat. The gossip was written with the precision of a dagger, and though it did not name her outright, everyone in their circles would know who the widow was. She felt the eyes of passers-by on her, the curious glances, the faint smirk of a woman pretending not to stare. Shame, that old and unwanted companion, surged through her, but beneath it burned something fiercer: rage. Madeleine turned sharply, her shawl catching the wind like a banner of defiance. She did not think, she simply moved, through the morning crowd, past the carriages splashing water over the street, toward the only man who could have prevented this: Henri Beaumont. By the time she reached his offices near the Place Vendôme, her gloves were damp, her heart pounding with indignation. The receptionist paled slightly when she entered without waiting to be announced. "Madame, please, Monsieur Beaumont is in a meeting." "He will see me," Madeleine said, her tone low and resolute. "Now." The double doors opened moments later, revealing Henri standing near his desk, flanked by two associates. When his gaze found hers, the color drained from his face. He dismissed the men immediately. They hesitated only a second before bowing and retreating, leaving the door to close behind them. Henri stepped forward. "Madeleine." She threw the newspaper onto his desk. "You told me you sought justice," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Was this what you meant? Public humiliation disguised as redemption?" He looked at the headline, his expression darkening. "Dear God," he murmured, "I had no hand in this. Do not lie to me, Monsieur Beaumont. The entire city believes I have sold my dignity for your sympathy." He reached for the paper, scanning the paragraphs, his jaw tightening with each line. "This is Marceau's work," he said at last, his voice rough. "He must have seen us at the Valerie ball. He would know precisely how to twist it. Madeleine's anger faltered, replaced by disbelief. You think he did this? I know it, Henri said. He has wanted leverage over me for months. What better way than to tarnish your name and make me the villain once more? The sincerity in his tone shook her certainty. Still, the humiliation clung to her skin like rain that would not dry. She turned away, staring at the grand room with its polished mahogany and gilded frames. It was the world of men like him, the powerful, the untouchable, and she, no matter how poised she appeared, did not belong in it. Henri approached slowly, cautious, as one might approach something precious and fragile. Madeleine, please, look at me. She did, reluctantly, and found not arrogance in his eyes, but something that looked dangerously like guilt. I will fix this, he said. I will publish a retraction. Silence the gossip. She gave a hollow laugh. Silence the gossip. Paris thrives on scandal, monsieur. You cannot silence hunger with apologies. Henri's hands tightened at his sides. Then let me give them something else to talk about. Her brows lifted. What do you mean? He hesitated, weighing the words. Let me offer you a position, an official one, at the Beaumont Foundation. A translator, an editor for our literacy program. That way, any association between us would appear professional. She stared at him, stunned. You wish to hire me? I wish to protect you, he said simply. And yes, perhaps to keep you near, if you would allow it. The quiet confession between his words made her pulse falter. I cannot accept charity, she said after a long pause. This is not charity. You are more capable than anyone I know. The Foundation has need of someone like you. Madeleine's heart twisted. She wanted to refuse, to hold on to the last shred of pride she possessed. Yet the reality of her situation pressed against her like cold hands. The whispers would grow, her clients would withdraw, her livelihood would vanish. You would be my employer, she said quietly. I would be your ally, he corrected. Their gazes locked again, his filled with unspoken yearning, hers with reluctant trust. At last she nodded. Very well, I will accept, but on one condition. Name it. You will not speak of this scandal again, not to me, not to anyone. He inclined his head. You have my word. That afternoon, when she entered the offices of the Beaumont Foundation as its newest translator, the staff whispered politely behind gloved hands. Henri greeted her formally, as if they were strangers, and introduced her to the director of operations. But every glance they exchanged held a private current of understanding, a silent promise neither dared to voice. Days passed, and their routine settled into an uneasy rhythm. Madeleine worked at a desk near the tall windows overlooking the city, her quill scratching across pages filled with correspondence from donors and educators. Henri often remained late, reviewing accounts or drafting letters by lamplight. Sometimes he would pause near her table, offering a document, a question, a word of advice. Their exchanges were brief, proper, yet each carried that same undercurrent, the awareness of what could not be said. One evening, as dusk fell, he found her still working. The office was empty except for them, and the golden glow of the lamps cast a soft warmth over the polished desks. You should not stay so late, Henri said. I could say the same of you, she replied, dipping her pen once more. He smiled faintly. Perhaps I stay because I prefer the quiet, or because you cannot bear to go home to an empty house, she said without looking up. His silence answered her. When she finally glanced up, he was standing closer than before, his expression unguarded. You see too much, he said softly. And you hide too much, she answered. The moment stretched between them, delicate as glass. The sound of the rain began again outside, a soft drumming on the window pane. Henri took a slow step forward, then stopped, his voice low. May I tell you something, Madame Rousseau? She nodded, wary yet curious. I once believed remorse was a punishment, but now I think it is a mercy. It reminds us that we can still feel. Her breath caught. And what is it you feel now? He looked at her with quiet intensity. that I am no longer the man I was when I signed those papers." Madeleine turned away, her fingers trembling against the parchment. "You should not say such things." "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I might believe them." For a moment, neither moved. The tension between them was palpable, the ache of something forbidden, yet undeniable. The lamplight traced the line of her jaw, the curve of his hand, as it rested on the edge of her desk. Then suddenly, the door opened. A servant entered, breathless. "Monsieur Beaumont, there is a man outside. He insists upon speaking with you. He says it concerns the widow Rousseau." Madeleine's heart stopped. Henri straightened, his composure snapping back into place. "Send him away," he said sharply. The servant hesitated. "He claims to have proof of a letter." Henri's gaze met Madeleine's, sharp, protective, afraid. "Wait here," he ordered softly, then followed the servant out. Alone, Madeleine sat rigid, her hands cold. Outside, thunder rolled again over Paris. She stared at the half-written letter before her, its ink bleeding slowly across the paper, and realized that the world had found new ways to test her resolve. When Henri returned nearly 20 minutes later, his face was pale. "It was nothing," he said, "a messenger sent by Marceau trying to unsettle us." She searched his expression. "Us?" He hesitated, then spoke the truth she had long suspected. "He does not mean to destroy me, Madeleine. He means to destroy you, to break whatever faith remains between us." Her throat tightened. "Then he has already succeeded." Henri's voice trembled with quiet desperation. "Do not let him." Madeleine rose slowly, her eyes glistening but fierce. "I survived the whispers of a city once, Monsieur Beaumont. I can survive them again, but I will not survive false hope." He took a step closer, his voice raw. "This is not false." The silence that followed was heavy with everything they could not allow themselves to say. Outside, the rain fell harder, streaking the glass in silver lines, while inside, two hearts, one wounded by loss, the other by guilt, stood suspended between the memory of ruin and the fragile promise of something that might yet be called love. And though neither of them spoke again, they both knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had already begun between them. The rain had stopped hours ago, but Paris still glistened as though it had been freshly painted in silver and sorrow. The streets were quiet now, the gas lamps haloed in mist, their light trembling over the cobblestones like candle flames caught in glass. Through an open window of the Beaumont Foundation, the faint glow of a single lamp spilled into the night, the only sign of life left within its grand facade. Madeleine Rousseau sat alone in the small reading room, her shawl draped around her shoulders, the air faintly scented with ink, wood polish, and rain. Stacks of translated manuscripts surrounded her, yet she could not focus. Every line she read blurred into another thought, Henri's voice echoing from earlier that afternoon, his words heavy with meaning. "This is not false." She wanted to believe him. Heaven help her, she did. But every time she let her guard drop, the weight of memory pulled her back down. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. And yet, even now, her pulse betrayed her whenever his name crossed her thoughts. The clock struck 11. A soft sound came from the hallway. Footsteps, deliberate, slowing near the door. She did not look up. "You should not be here, Monsieur Beaumont," she said quietly. Henri paused in the doorway, his silhouette tall against the lamplight from the corridor. "Then neither should you," he replied. His tone was gentle, carrying that mix of weariness and determination she had come to know too well. Madeleine sighed, setting aside her quill. "Work has always been my refuge, and guilt has always been mine," he said, stepping into the room. He removed his gloves and placed them on the table, every motion unhurried. His eyes, darker than the night outside, searched her face with a tenderness that both unsettled and warmed her. "You should rest, Madeleine," she smiled faintly. "I have forgotten how." Henri hesitated before taking the chair opposite hers. "Then perhaps we can both remember together." The remark, simple as it was, sent a quiet shiver through her. She met his gaze for a brief moment and then looked away. "The city sleeps," she murmured, "and yet we sit here pretending we are not ghosts haunting our own regrets." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Are you haunted by regret or by what might have been?" Madeleine's lips parted in surprise, but she recovered quickly. "Some things are not meant to be imagined, monsieur." "Then why do we both keep imagining them?" he asked softly. Her breath caught. There it was, the truth she had avoided, spoken with disarming calm. For several seconds, the only sound between them was the steady tick of the clock and the faint rustle of the wind beyond the shutters. "Do not ask questions you already know the answer to," she said finally, rising to gather her papers. But Henri rose too, crossing the distance between them before she could retreat. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Then, allow me to say what has gone unspoken too long." She froze, her hands trembling slightly as she turned to face him. "If you speak of the past, I will not listen. I speak of the present," he said, "and of you." The lamp flickered, its flame bending in the draught. The shadows around them deepened, wrapping them in fragile isolation. "I have tried to silence this," Henri continued, his tone uneven now, his composure unraveling in the edges of his voice. "I told myself it was respect, or remorse, or penance that drew me to you. But that was a lie. The truth is, I am drawn to you because somewhere between guilt and admiration, I began to care for you in a way I cannot contain." Madeleine's throat tightened. She turned her face slightly, but his words seemed to follow her like the echo of a forbidden prayer. "You should not say this," she whispered. "I know," he admitted, "but I cannot live another day pretending that silence is virtue." Her eyes met his, shining with unshed tears. "Do you think words will erase what stands between us? My husband's death, your signature, whether forged or not, your power, my loss. We are not equals, Henri. We never will be." He took another step closer, his presence overwhelming yet gentle. "Then let me fall, if that is what equality requires." She looked at him, startled by the quiet sincerity in his tone. "Do not speak like that." "I mean every word," he said. "I would give away every piece of what I've built if it meant I could stand beside you without shame." The air between them pulsed with tension, a fragile, beautiful ache that felt like it might break the world in half. Madeleine's voice shook when she spoke. "You would ruin yourself for a woman who cannot forgive you?" Henri's reply came softly. "I would redeem myself for the woman who taught me how." Something inside her cracked. For a long time she had lived armored in restraint, but now, with his words, that armor felt impossibly heavy. She pressed her hand to her locket, the same gesture she always made when pain threatened to drown her. "Please," she said faintly, "do not make this harder." Henri reached out, his hand stopping just short of hers. "You keep touching that locket as though it holds the key to everything. What does it say?" "It says nothing you do not already know," she answered, her voice trembling. "Then let me read it," he said. "Perhaps it will remind me of what I'm fighting for." She shook her head, stepping back. "No, it is not for you, but you are," he murmured. The words left her breathless. "You speak as if I belong to anyone." "I speak as if I cannot stop loving you," he said. The confession hung in the air like lightning before thunder, beautiful, dangerous, irreversible. Madeleine's hand fell from her locket. "You don't mean that," she said weakly. "I mean every syllable." She turned away, her pulse racing. "You cannot love what you destroyed." "I destroyed a man's fortune," he said. "I never meant to destroy his wife's heart." Her voice trembled. "And yet you did." He closed the distance between them, his hand lifting slightly, hesitant. "Then tell me how to make it right. Tell me what I must do, and I will do it." Madeleine looked up at him, her grey-blue eyes luminous in the lamplight. "You cannot return what has been taken, Henri. I can give what remains," he whispered. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The weight of his nearness pressed against her resolve until her body betrayed her heart. She felt her own breath falter, the scent of him, a faint mix of tobacco, ink, and rain, folding around her like memory. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why make me remember what I have spent years trying to forget?" "Because forgetting you would be a greater sin than anything I've done," he said. For a long time, neither moved. The night stretched around them, the world outside silent and suspended. Then Henri took a slow breath. "You once told me I cannot undo death. You were right, but I can choose to honor the living. Let me begin with you." Her gaze softened, but her voice was still unsteady. "Do you not see, Henri? Love between us would be a war with the world. Every door would close, every whisper would follow. I could not survive that again." "Then let them whisper," he said. "Let them close their doors. I have lived too long in the approval of those who have no souls." Her tears fell then, quiet, reluctant, one after another. She hated herself for them, for the way her body leaned imperceptibly toward his warmth. "You do not know what you ask," she whispered. "Then teach me," he murmured. He reached out again, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed away one of her tears with the back of his fingers. It was the barest touch, but it burned like sunlight through fog. Madeleine's breath hitched. "This cannot be." Henri's voice broke, tender and resolute. "Then let it be impossible. I will still want it." Her eyes closed. For a moment, the sound of rain began again outside, soft against the window panes, as though the heavens themselves had decided to weep for them. When she opened her eyes, she saw the truth in his. Devotion, sorrow, and a kind of love that frightened her precisely because it felt so pure. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said, "because I see it every time you look at me and still stay." Her heart trembled at his words. "And what if one day I cannot stay?" Henri's lips curved in a sad smile. "Then I will wait in every silence you leave behind." The clock struck midnight. The sound filled the room like a verdict. Madeleine drew in a shaky breath and stepped back, breaking the fragile proximity between them. "You should go," she whispered. He hesitated. "Madeleine." "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "If you stay, I will not have the strength to hate you, and that is all that keeps me safe." Henri's expression crumpled for a moment, then steadied. "Very well," he said softly, "but know this. You have already forgiven me more than you realize." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. The lamplight cast his shadow across the floor, long and solemn. "I will not stop trying to be the man worthy of your forgiveness," he said, "even if you never give it." When the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier than before. Madeleine stood motionless, her hand pressed to her chest where his touch still lingered like a secret flame. She sank into the chair, her body trembling, her heart both bruised and alive in ways it had not been in years. The clock ticked steadily, marking each second that separated what was forbidden from what was undeniable. And somewhere in the night, beneath the whisper of rain, she whispered his name for the first time, not in anger, but in longing. Henri. The sound of it was soft, fragile, and full of a love she would never dare to speak in daylight. The days that followed their midnight confession unfolded like a delicate storm, quiet, but charged with a tension neither could deny. Paris seemed suspended between winter and spring, its skies pale and uncertain, its streets still washed with the scent of thawing rain. Inside the Beaumont Foundation, life continued with the same polite rhythm, yet beneath its surface, something fragile and forbidden had taken root. Madeleine Rousseau arrived earlier than usual that morning, the hem of her skirt brushing against the marble floors as she climbed the narrow staircase to her small office. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly through the quiet halls. She told herself it was only diligence that brought her in before the others, but in truth she sought the solitude of those early hours, the one part of the day untouched by expectation or fear. The night of Henri's confession lingered in her memory like a secret too beautiful and too dangerous to hold. She had replayed it endlessly in her mind, his voice low and trembling, his words full of a tenderness that had both broken and comforted her. And though she had begged him to leave, her heart had betrayed her the moment she whispered his name into the dark. She sat at her desk now, forcing her mind to the work before her. Letters from educators in Lyon and Marseille lay scattered across the table, awaiting her translations. Her fingers, pale and graceful, moved mechanically over the page, but her thoughts drifted to him, Henri Beaumont, the man who had ruined her life, and the man who now seemed determined to restore it. At the stroke of 9, a knock sounded at her door. She stiffened. "Come in." The door opened slowly, and there he was, Henri himself, his presence filling the room like a quiet storm. He wore a dark morning coat, his cravat perfectly tied, but his eyes held a weariness that no polish could conceal. "Madame Rousseau," he greeted softly. "Forgive the intrusion." Her pulse quickened. "You do not need permission to enter your own foundation, Monsieur Beaumont." "Oh, and yet," he said, a faint smile touching his lips, "I find myself seeking it all the same." Madeleine looked away, pretending to busy herself with the stack of papers before her. "What brings you here so early?" "I thought you might wish to see this," he said, extending an envelope toward her. "A letter from my solicitor. It concerns the accusations Marceau has been spreading." She hesitated before taking it. The wax seal bore Henri's crest, and the paper smelled faintly of tobacco and ink. She broke it open carefully, scanning the contents. Her eyes widened slightly. "He threatens legal action against you." Henri nodded. "Yes. It seems he intends to drag both our names through the courts, claiming defamation. He means to destroy us in public if he cannot do so in private." Madeleine's heart sank. "Then it has already begun." "Not yet," he said. "Not if we are careful." She looked up at him, her voice calm but edged with sorrow. "Careful? Do you believe discretion can protect us now? We are already a story whispered through every salon in Paris." Henri met her gaze steadily. "Then let them whisper. Let them invent their scandals. The truth will endure longer than their tongues." Madeleine's breath caught. "You speak as though truth were a shield." "Sometimes it is," he said, "and sometimes it is the only weapon we have." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence filled with all that remained unsaid. Then Madeleine folded the letter and set it aside. "What would you have me do?" Henri's voice softened. "Nothing that would place you in danger. Leave Marceau to me." Her eyes flashed. "You forget, monsieur, that my husband's name still carries the stain of his deceit. If this matter concerns him, it concerns me." Henri stepped closer, the light from the window framing his face in pale gold. "And if I asked you to trust me?" She met his gaze, her own trembling between pride and yearning. "I am trying." The confession escaped her like a sigh, and Henri froze, as though afraid any movement might shatter the fragile truth between them. "Then let me try too," he said quietly. He turned toward the window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "I have lived my life by ambition. Every decision I ever made was guided by it, until you changed that. You changed everything." Madeleine's throat tightened. "You speak as if I were your salvation." Henri faced her again, his expression solemn. "Perhaps you are." She shook her head. "No man should seek redemption in another's heart." "Then what should he seek?" he asked. "Forgiveness," she whispered, "but only if he can bear it." He took a slow step forward, the air between them heavy with the scent of rain and ink. "And can you bear to give it?" She looked at him, the question cutting deep. "I do not know." Their eyes held for a long moment, two souls caught between ruin and redemption. Madeleine felt her defenses falter under the weight of his gaze. There was no arrogance there, no expectation, only the quiet, desperate sincerity of a man who had spent years in self-imposed exile from his own heart. "Henri," she said softly, his name trembling on her lips like a forbidden prayer. It was the first time she had spoken it in his presence. The sound of it seemed to change something in the room. Henri's breath caught, and for a moment the facade of composure he had so carefully maintained cracked. "Say it again," he murmured. Her cheeks flushed. "Do not ask me that. Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once more." Madeleine closed her eyes, torn between reason and longing. "Henri." He exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for years. The silence that followed was almost unbearable in its intimacy. He took another step forward, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. His hand lifted, then stopped inches from her cheek. "May I?" he asked. The question hung between them like a fragile thread. Madeleine hesitated, then gave the slightest nod. His fingers brushed her face, tracing the curve of her jaw with a tenderness that felt both reverent and terrifying. "You are stronger than anyone I have ever known," he said. "And yet you tremble." Her voice broke. "Because I know I should stop you, and I cannot." His thumb lingered near her lips, and for one suspended heartbeat, the entire world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. The warmth of his skin against hers, the faint scent of rain still clinging to his coat, the quiet hum of two hearts refusing to let go. Then, with a soft, trembling breath, she stepped back. "You must not come here again," she said, her voice barely steady. "Not like this." Henri's hand fell to his side. "If I promised to stay away, I would be lying." "Then lie," she said, though her voice faltered on the word. "Lie, for both our sakes." He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to memorize her face. "I will not lie to you, Madeleine, not again." She turned away, her hand gripping the edge of the desk. "Then you will destroy us both." "Perhaps," he said quietly. "But if I must be ruined, I would rather it be by truth than by silence." The words struck her harder than he could have imagined. She sank into her chair, her composure trembling like the flame of the lamp beside her. Henri hesitated, torn between leaving and staying, between honor and desire. At last, he moved toward the door. "You once told me you cannot forgive," he said softly, "but I will keep speaking until your heart remembers how." And then he was gone. Madeleine sat in silence, her pulse still racing. The room felt too small, the air too thin. She rose abruptly and went to the window. Outside, the city glowed beneath a grey morning sky, its chimneys breathing pale smoke into the air. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, church bells began to toll, their sound distant and mournful. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, closing her eyes. "What am I doing?" she whispered. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman divided between past and present, duty and desire. She thought of her husband's final letter, of the words written in his steady hand, "Look beyond the ink." And for the first time, she wondered if those words were not meant as a warning, but as permission, to see not only the guilt that bound her, but the life that still waited beyond it. That evening, long after the office had emptied, she found herself still at her desk, the lamplight dim and golden around her. A soft knock sounded at the door again, not Henri's this time, but the young clerk, Pierre, who managed correspondence. "Madame Rousseau," he said, hesitant. "This was delivered for you." She accepted the envelope, her name written in an unfamiliar hand. When she broke the seal, her heart began to pound. Inside was a single line written in bold, deliberate script. "If you wish to know the truth about Beaumont's fortune and your husband's death, meet me at midnight by the Seine." The note was unsigned. Madeleine stared at it, her breath quickening. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The faint reflection of the lamp trembled in her eyes. Whatever awaited her by the river, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life and Henri's would never again return to peace. And though she told herself she was afraid, a deeper truth pulsed beneath her fear. Somewhere between guilt and love, between truth and ruin, her heart had already made its choice. The city had surrendered to night. Its pulse slowed beneath the pale glow of the gas lamps that lined the quays of the Seine. The air was damp and heavy with fog, softening the edges of the bridges and turning the distant silhouettes of the cathedral towers into shadows that seemed to float upon the water. A cold wind rose from the river, carrying with it the scent of iron and rain-soaked stone. Madeleine Rousseau stood at the edge of the quay, her gloved hands clasped tightly around her shawl. The note she had received that afternoon still rested against her heart, folded and worn from being read too many times. If you wish to know the truth about Beaumont's fortune and your husband's death, meet me at midnight by the Seine. The hour had come. She had told no one of the letter, not even Henri, especially not Henri. Every instinct had warned her that this might be a trap, but curiosity, and something far more dangerous, hope, had led her here. The truth had haunted her for too long. Tonight she would face it, whatever it demanded. A carriage passed on the distant bridge, its wheels echoing across the cobblestones before fading again into silence. The fog thickened, swallowing the lamplight until the world seemed carved from shadows and breath. Then, from the mist, a figure emerged. Lucien Marceau. He approached with the smooth assurance of a man accustomed to power. His coat was of fine black wool, his hat tilted just enough to shield his eyes. When he removed it, the lamplight revealed the faintest smile, cold, polite, and entirely without mercy. "Madame Rousseau," he greeted, his voice deep and measured. "Punctual. I must commend you for your courage." Madeleine's spine stiffened. "You sent the letter." "I did," he said, as though confessing to nothing more consequential than an invitation. "You must forgive the secrecy. It was the only way to speak to you without interruption." She studied him, every instinct alert. "If you have something to say, say it." He stepped closer, the click of his boots sharp against the stone. "I wish to speak of your husband, and of Henri Beaumont." At the mention of Henri's name, her heart tightened. "What of them?" Lucien paused, as though savoring the moment. "You believe your husband's ruin was caused by a forged signature and a ruthless act of commerce. A convenient story, is it not? It spares everyone the ugliness of the truth." Her voice trembled. "And what truth do you claim to possess?" "The truth," he said slowly, "that Etienne Rousseau was not an innocent victim. He was my accomplice." The world seemed to tilt. Madeleine's breath faltered. "That is a lie." Lucien's smile deepened. "Is it? He came to me with the contracts himself. He sought investors for his press, and I introduced him to Beaumont. But when he realized that Beaumont's expansion would render him irrelevant, he panicked. He tried to sell his shares twice, once to me, once to a rival. When his deceit was discovered, the scandal would have been inevitable. I only hastened the outcome." Her voice broke, low and unsteady. "You drove him to despair." "I merely revealed his hypocrisy," Lucien replied, his tone sharp as glass. "He could not live with the shame, but do not pretend his hands were clean. He was ambitious, like all men, like Beaumont, like me." Madeleine shook her head, her eyes burning with anger. "You twist the truth as easily as others breathe. My husband was a good man. He believed in honesty, in work, in art. You destroyed him because you could." Lucien's eyes glinted in the fog. "And Beaumont destroyed you because he would not see what was before him. Tell me, Madame Rousseau, which sin is greater, ambition or ignorance?" Her hand trembled at her side, but her voice grew steadier. "You have no right to speak his name." Lucien chuckled softly. "Ah, so it is true then. The widow and the magnate. Paris is buzzing with your little tragedy. The man who ruined you, now your protector. And perhaps more." Madeleine's cheeks flushed, but her eyes did not waver. "You may poison his reputation, monsieur, but not my heart." For the first time, Lucien's smile faltered. "How noble," he said quietly. "How foolish." He took another step forward, too close now, the fog curling around them like smoke. "Do you not see, Madame Rousseau? I could end him. His empire, his fortune, his name, all of it rests upon my silence. I hold the letters, the contracts, the very proof of his deceit. If I reveal them, he falls. But if you speak for him, if you testify that your husband's death was no fault of his, I might be persuaded to reconsider." Madeleine's voice was a whisper. "You want me to lie? I want you to choose," he said. "You can save the man you love, or destroy him as surely as he destroyed your husband." For a moment the sound of the river drowned everything else. Madeleine stood motionless, her heart pounding against her ribs. Love or justice, past or present. Every choice she had made until now seemed to converge in this single instant. Then a voice cut through the fog. "Enough!" Both turned. Henri Beaumont emerged from the mist, his coat unbuttoned, his expression carved from fury and resolve. The sight of him was like the sudden return of light after too long in darkness. "Henri," Madeleine whispered, her hand lifting unconsciously toward him. He stopped beside her, his gaze locked on Marceau. "I should have known you would resort to cowardice." Marceau smirked. "Cowardice? No, Beaumont. Pragmatism. You taught me that." Henri's jaw tightened. "You betrayed me. You betrayed every man who ever trusted you. And yet," Marceau said smoothly, "here we are, both still alive. That is more than can be said for Rousseau." Henri's composure shattered. He lunged forward, grabbing Marceau by the collar. "Do not speak his name!" The two men struggled, the sound of their scuffle breaking the stillness of the quay. Madeleine cried out, reaching toward them, but Henri's strength was formidable, born of years of rage suppressed beneath civility. "Henri, stop!" she pleaded, but he did not hear. Marceau's taunting laughter only spurred him on. "You think you can erase your sins, Beaumont? You think this widow will wash you clean?" Henri's fist collided with Marceau's jaw, sending him stumbling back toward the stone railing. The echo of the impact carried through the night like a gunshot. For a moment no one moved. Marceau wiped the blood from his lip, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "You've just given Paris a better story than I ever could." He turned, disappearing into the fog, with the sound of footsteps fading along the quay. Henri stood motionless, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. When he finally turned to Madeleine, his expression was torn between fury and despair. "You should not have come here," he said hoarsely. She stepped closer. "I came for the truth." "And what did you find?" he asked bitterly. "The truth," she said softly, "is that you are not the man he believes you to be." Henri looked away, his voice low. "He was right about one thing. I have built my life on ambition. I've destroyed everything I've ever touched." Madeleine reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Do not say that," she whispered. "You've spent years trying to undo what was done. You've given everything, your name, your peace, for a chance to make it right." He turned back to her, his eyes shadowed. "And if it's not enough," her voice trembled, "then let me share what remains." He stared at her for a long moment, as though the words themselves had struck him harder than any blow. "Madeleine," he began, but his voice failed. She stepped closer, her hand lifting to his cheek. "Do you not see, Henri? You've spent your life trying to rewrite the past, but the only redemption worth having is the one we give each other." He closed his eyes at her touch, his breath unsteady. "And if the world condemns us both, then let it," she whispered. "I have already lived in its judgment. I would rather live in your truth." Her words undid him. Slowly, his hand rose to cover hers, their fingers intertwining, trembling together in the cold night. The sound of the river filled the silence between them, a low, eternal song that seemed to echo the rhythm of two hearts long kept apart. Henri opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "You forgive me, then?" She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "No, Henri, I love you. Forgiveness is only its shadow." The fog thickened, wrapping them in a cocoon of pale light. Henri leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling, their silence speaking more than any vow could. For the first time, the weight between them lifted, not erased but shared. The bells of Notre Dame began to toll the midnight hour, their sound carrying across the water like a benediction. Henri took her hand in his and whispered, "Whatever comes next, I will face it with you." Madeleine nodded, her voice a whisper lost in the wind. "Then let it come." And as the final bell faded into the night, the fog swallowed their figures by the river's edge, two souls no longer bound by guilt, but by a love that had survived the ruin of everything else. Morning came without mercy. Paris woke, as it always did, with the unhurried arrogance of a city that believed itself eternal. The Seine kept moving, indifferent to what it had witnessed in the fog. The bells that had tolled midnight were quiet now, replaced by the clatter of delivery carts, the calls of vendors, the soft scrape of brooms against stone. Yet for Madeleine Rousseau, the world felt altered, as if the night had cracked something open that could never be sealed again. She sat at the small table in her apartment, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone lukewarm. The room was still as a chapel, and for the first time in years, the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like a threshold. Across from her, Henri Beaumont stood near the window, his back to the light, his posture rigid. He had not removed his coat since escorting her home after the confrontation at the river. He looked like a man who had wrestled with his own name and lost. The fog of the night still lived in his eyes. Madeleine watched him closely, as though she were memorizing the way his shoulders rose and fell, the way his jaw clenched whenever the city noises seeped through the window. There was something terrifying about seeing him here, in her modest space, stripped of boardrooms and velvet salons. He did not look like a magnate now. He looked like a man carrying a weight he could no longer set down. Henri turned at last. His gaze found her immediately, as if it had been searching for her, even while his body faced elsewhere. "I shouldn't have let you go alone," he said, his voice rough with sleeplessness. "You didn't," Madeleine replied softly. "You found me, and you could have been harmed before I did." His hands tightened, then loosened, as if he were fighting the instinct to reach for her and restrain her from the world itself. "That letter was meant to lure you." Madeleine lowered her eyes to the rim of her cup. "It succeeded." Henri crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away, as though closeness required permission now. "I need you to promise me something." She looked up, steady. "I don't make promises out of fear, Henri." Pain flickered across his face at the sound of his name, spoken with love now, not accusation. "Then promise me out of reason," he said. "If a message arrives again, if someone asks you to meet in shadow, you tell me." Madeleine's fingers tightened around her cup. "And if you forbid me?" "I won't forbid you," he answered, voice low. "I will stand beside you." The words hung between them like a vow neither dared to call by its name. She set down her cup. "You came here thinking I would regret what I said last night." Henri's throat moved as he swallowed. "I came here hoping you wouldn't." Madeleine held his gaze, her eyes luminous in the soft morning light. "I meant it." Henri's expression shattered for a moment, relief and disbelief, and the kind of tenderness that made his composure feel like a fragile mask. He took one step closer, then stopped again, as if even air between them had to be respected. "Madeleine," he whispered, "if you truly love me, then you must let me do what I came to do." She blinked. "What is that?" "To end this," he said simply. "Not between us, around us." Her breath caught. She knew what he meant. The rumors, Marceau's threats, the forged signature, the stain on Etienne's name, the uncertainty that still hovered like a blade over their fragile peace. Madeleine rose slowly, smoothing her skirt with a motion as careful as prayer. "Then tell me what you intend." Henri's gaze sharpened, no longer haunted but resolved. "I intend to bring the documents into daylight, not in whispers, not in back corridors, but publicly. I will call for a formal inquiry into the acquisition of Rousseau Press and place every contract, every ledger entry, every letter into the record." Her heart pounded. Not from fear alone, but from the sheer magnitude of what he was offering. "That will expose you." "Yes," Henri said without flinching. "And it will expose him." Madeleine's lips trembled. "You said you would protect me from danger. This will pull me into it." Henri stepped closer, finally closing the distance enough that Madeleine could feel warmth radiating from him. He did not touch her yet. His restraint was its own tenderness. "I won't protect you by locking you away," he said. "I will protect you by honoring you, by giving you a place to stand where no one can push you into the shadows again." Madeleine's eyes filled. She lifted her chin, gathering the strength she had once been forced to forge alone. "Then I will stand." Henri's breath hitched. "You would do this with me?" "I would do it for Etienne," she replied softly. "And I would do it for myself." Her voice deepened, unwavering. "And yes, Henri, I would do it for you." For a moment, Henri looked as if he might fall to his knees from gratitude alone. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving her every chance to refuse. His fingertips touched the back of her hand. Barely there, a contact so gentle it felt like a question. Madeleine did not pull away. She turned her hand, and their fingers intertwined fully, trembling together. Henri bowed his head over their joined hands, his lips hovering near her knuckles, without crossing into scandal. "You have no idea what it cost me to be worthy of that," he whispered. Madeleine's voice softened. "Then pay it, Henri, with truth." The days that followed moved like a procession. Paris spoke, as Paris always did. Newspapers multiplied their speculation, cafes sharpened their jokes, salons dripped with amused cruelty. Clémence Valérie appeared in public with her serene smile and her jeweled composure, pretending surprise at the fever of gossip, while quietly encouraging it with the skill of a woman who fed on attention. But this time, Madeleine did not hide. She arrived at the Beaumont Foundation each morning with her bonnet straight, her gloves immaculate, her posture unbroken. Some employees avoided her eyes. Others offered small bows filled with respect, and Henri greeted her not with private longing, but with public honor, introducing her in meetings by name, allowing her work to speak where rumor tried to shout. On the morning of the inquiry, Madeleine entered the chamber with Henri at her side. He offered his arm, not as possession, as partnership. Her gloved hand rested upon his sleeve, and the contact sent a quiet tremor through her, not weakness, but strength. The sensation reminded her of something she had thought impossible: safety. Henri's gaze flickered toward her as they walked. "Are you afraid?" Madeleine's lips curved faintly. "Yes." He leaned closer, voice low enough for only her. "Then let me hold the fear with you." Madeleine breathed in slowly. "Do not let go." "I won't," he promised. The chamber was filled with men who believed they ruled the world with paper and signatures. There were solicitors, businessmen, officials, and observers hungry for spectacle. Henri's presence commanded attention immediately. Murmurs rose like a wind through reeds. Madeleine felt the weight of their stares, the sharp curiosity, the quiet judgment. But then she felt Henri's arm beneath her hand, steady as stone, and she did not bend. Henri spoke first. His voice carried through the room, calm and precise, stripped of ornament. He presented the documents he had discovered, the inconsistencies, the signatures that were nearly his, but not quite, the clauses he insisted had never been placed before him. He did not plead innocence. He admitted negligence without excuse. "I allowed my ambition to make me blind," he said, "and blindness is its own crime." The room shifted, uncomfortable. They had come expecting arrogance or evasion. Instead, they received accountability. Then Madeleine was called. She rose, her heartbeat loud in her ears, and stepped forward. She spoke of her husband not as a saint, but as a man, honest, proud, stubborn, and human. She did not deny that he had wanted success. She did not deny that he had believed too easily in the goodness of those with power. She held up the locket, its silver glint catching the light, and the room seemed to hush. "This was his," she said, voice steady. And inside is the last thing he wrote. She unfolded the small paper, hands trembling only slightly. "Look beyond the ink," she read, and her breath caught on the words. He did not write that as a riddle. He wrote it as a warning. He believed there was deceit beyond what could be seen. Henri's gaze never left her face, and in that gaze Madeleine found an anchor. Then came what Marceau had not anticipated. A clerk from one of the early firms involved in the acquisition appeared with a bundle of archived correspondence, letters that had been misfiled, forgotten, and now produced under scrutiny. The papers were not dramatic in appearance, not stained with blood or sealed with theatrical wax. They were ordinary, and that was what made them devastating. Henri's solicitor read aloud passages that revealed the hand behind the orchestration. Instructions written by Lucien Marceau, authorizing the rushed clauses, arranging the transfers, guiding the forged signatures' placement with careful timing. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Henri remained still. Madeleine's hand found the edge of the table, gripping it for balance, not because she was weak, but because the truth carried weight. Marceau was summoned. He did not arrive. His absence spoke louder than any defense. An official rose, face tight with outrage, and declared warrants for seizure of documents from Marceau's office and residence. A man near the back whispered that Marceau had been seen leaving Paris at dawn 2 days earlier, traveling under a name not his own. But even in flight, he could not erase what had been revealed. The inquiry concluded with a declaration that Rousseau Press's collapse had been accelerated and exploited through fraudulent measures, concealed behind Henri Beaumont's authority. Henri's negligence was acknowledged. Marceau's deceit was named. And then, for the first time in years, the name Etienne Rousseau was spoken in public without contempt. Madeleine walked out of that chamber trembling, not from fear now, but from something closer to release. Outside, the winter air struck her cheeks. She drew in a breath that felt like the first clean air she had tasted in years. Henri stepped close, his voice raw. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not as a phrase, as a truth. Madeleine turned to him, eyes shining. "You've already said sorry," she whispered. "Today you proved it." Henri's hand rose to her cheek, his touch gentle and restrained even now in public. "What happens now?" he asked, voice trembling. "What do I do with the life I have left?" Madeleine's lips curved through tears. "You live it," she said, "with courage." The weeks that followed were not easy. Paris did not become kind overnight. Some doors remained closed, some whispers persisted, though now they lacked the same cruelty, tempered by the uncomfortable truth that the widow had not been bought. She had stood and spoken and prevailed. Henri faced consequences. Contracts were re-evaluated. Allies withdrew. A portion of his fortune was diverted into restitution and legal settlements that he accepted without complaint. But something else happened too. Rousseau Press was reborn, not as the same fragile business it once was, but as a foundation within the Beaumont philanthropic network, bearing Etienne's name openly, proudly, a place for writers, printers, translators, and those the city had once discarded. Madeleine walked through the reopened rooms on the day the first presses began turning again. The scent of ink filled the air, rich, alive, familiar enough to break her heart and mend it in the same breath. Paper fed into the machine, and when the first sheet emerged, warm and fresh, she pressed her gloved fingertips to it, as if touching a living thing. Henri stood behind her, silent. Madeleine turned slowly. "You did this." Henri's eyes were dark with emotion. "You did," he corrected. "I only followed you." She stepped closer, and in the quiet of the press room, where the world sounded distant, she lifted her hand to his chest. She felt the steady beat beneath his coat, proof that he was not a monument, not an iron tower, but a man. "A man can lose everything and still be honorable," she whispered. Henri's voice broke. "And a woman can lose everything and still be radiant." Madeleine's cheeks warmed. "Do not flatter me." "It isn't flattery," he said. "It's worship, restrained only by respect. Her breath caught at the tenderness of it. Henri reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He did not open it yet. He held it as if it weighed more than gold. Madeleine's heart slowed, then surged. Henri lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up at her with quiet reverence. "I will not ask you to erase your past," he said. "I will not ask you to forget him. I will only ask this. Will you let me build a future that honors what you lost and what you still deserve?" Madeleine's throat tightened. She glanced at the presses, the ink, the reborn name, and she felt Etienne's memory not as a chain but as a presence. Quiet, dignified, acknowledged. She looked back at Henri. "Open it," she whispered. Henri did. Inside lay a ring simple enough to be sincere, a band of gold with a small stone that caught the light like a tear, turned into something precious. Madeleine did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she lifted her locket and opened it, letting Henri see Etienne's portrait once more, letting the past stand between them without shame. Then she closed it and rested it back against her heart. "I will not give you forgiveness as a gift," she said softly. "I will give you love as a choice." Henri's eyes filled, and he did not hide it. "Then I will spend my life proving I deserve that choice." Madeleine extended her hand. Henri slid the ring onto her gloved finger first, then paused, trembling. "May I?" She nodded, and he removed her glove with a tenderness that turned the simple act into a vow. When the ring settled against her skin, it felt like something settling into place within her too, an alignment of sorrow and hope, grief and devotion. Henri lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly, reverently, as though he was sealing a promise he intended to keep with every breath. Madeleine stepped forward, close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. "Henri," she whispered. He exhaled, smiling through tears. "Madeleine." Outside, Paris continued. The world kept gossiping, kept judging, kept pretending it held authority over hearts. But inside the press room, among the scent of ink and the hum of reborn work, two souls stood not as scandal, not as tragedy, but as triumph. And when Henri finally kissed her, soft, restrained, and trembling with reverence, it was not the kiss of a man claiming a woman. It was the kiss of a man thanking her for letting him become worthy. Madeleine's eyes closed, and she allowed herself at last to feel the simple, astonishing truth. The future had not been stolen from her. It had been rewritten. Paris, spring of 1900. The Seine flowed with the same eternal rhythm, its waters glimmering beneath the morning sun like ribbons of liquid glass. The city had changed, subtly, yet profoundly. The carriages that once ruled the boulevards now shared space with the strange hum of motor cars, and electric lights had begun to replace the soft golden flicker of gas lamps. But beneath the hum of progress, the heart of Paris still beat with poetry, still whispered in the language of love. On the corner of Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, the newly restored Maison Rousseau-Beaumont stood tall. The sign over its entrance gleamed proudly in gilded letters, carrying two names that once had been spoken only in scandal, and now in respect. Inside, the air smelled of ink and fresh paper. The printing presses turned quietly, producing not only novels and essays, but educational journals and translations for schools across France. Madeleine Beaumont stood by the tall windows of her office, watching the sunlight spill across the Seine. She was no longer the pale widow who once hid from the world's cruelty. Time had given her new strength, the kind that does not shout but endures. Her hair, gathered in a low chignon, streaked faintly with silver, framed a face where beauty had deepened into grace. The door behind her opened. "Mother," a voice said, warm and clear. She turned, her heart softening. "Luke," she said with a smile, "you're early." Her son crossed the threshold, a boy of 6, though he carried himself with the thoughtful quiet of someone far older. He had Henri's dark eyes and her smile, and when he grinned, he did so with the same earnestness that had once disarmed her defenses. In his hand, he held a small, folded page. "I finished my story," he announced proudly. "Will you read it?" "Of course," she said, kneeling beside him. She unfolded the paper carefully, her eyes moving over the uneven handwriting. It was a story about a boy who built a bridge so strong that even the river could not break it. She laughed softly, her heart tightening with tenderness. "It's beautiful," she said. Henri Beaumont appeared in the doorway, older now, but still carrying that quiet presence that drew every eye without commanding it. His hair was touched with grey at the temples, his posture less rigid, as though peace had finally taught his body what rest felt like. His gaze found Madeleine first, then their son. "I hope he's not showing you his story before I've seen it," Henri teased gently. Luc grinned. Mother promised she'd read it first. Henri raised an eyebrow. "Ah, betrayal begins young in this household." Madeleine laughed, rising to her feet. "You'll survive it," she said, smoothing her son's hair. "His imagination is yours, after all." Henri stepped forward, taking her hand with the ease of a man who had long since stopped fearing to do so. "No, my love," he said softly. "It's yours. You taught him to see the world not as it is, but as it could be." She looked up at him, and though the years had changed them both, the connection between them remained untouched, stronger even, burnished by time rather than dulled by it. They had weathered scandals, rebuildings, and the quiet judgment of a society that had never known what to make of two souls who refused to bow to its hypocrisy. But they had endured. Henri had sold the last of his shares in his industrial ventures years earlier, devoting himself fully to the foundation that bore both their names. He had chosen purpose over prestige, humility over influence, and found in that decision a peace ambition had never granted him. Luc tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Can I go see the press start?" Madeleine smiled. "Of course, but mind your coat." As the boy ran down the hall, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings, Henri slipped an arm around her waist. "He has your courage," he murmured. "And your heart," she replied. They stood together by the window for a long moment, watching the morning unfold over Paris. Down in the square the streets were filling, students hurrying to classes, vendors opening their stalls, carriages rolling past. But there was something different about the way people looked at the Maison Rousseau-Beaumont now. Where once there had been curiosity or disdain, there was respect. The name that had once been whispered in gossip now stood for resilience, for integrity, for a kind of love that had survived every attempt to silence it. In the years since that night by the river, Lucien Marceau had vanished into the folds of exile. Rumor said he died in Marseille under another name, a man who spent his final years drinking away the fortune he had stolen. Paris did not mourn him. The world forgot him easily, because the world always forgets those who create nothing but ruin. But it remembered Henri and Madeleine. Their foundation funded schools for widows and children of bankrupt tradesmen. Their press published works that gave voice to those long ignored. Sometimes, late at night, Henri would still wake from dreams of the past, haunted by the ghosts of his own ambition. But when he turned and saw Madeleine beside him, her breathing calm, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the darkness dissolved. One evening, as twilight fell over their garden, Madeleine found him sitting beneath the flowering chestnut tree, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. "Do you ever miss the man you were?" she asked quietly. Henri looked up at her, smiling faintly. "Every now and then. But then I remember, he was always looking for you, and he didn't even know it." Madeleine sat beside him, her skirt brushing his. "And you found me only to lose everything else." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I lost everything," he said. "And then I found what mattered." The scent of the blossoms filled the air. A breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the faint hum of the city, the laughter, the voices, the endless murmur of life continuing. They sat together until the stars appeared, their silence tender, unafraid. 7 years had passed, and the world had changed. But love, true love, had not. It had endured not in grand gestures or declarations, but in the small, steady rhythm of two hearts that had learned to beat together after everything else had fallen away. Inside the house, Luc's laughter rang again, pure and bright. Madeleine leaned her head against Henri's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "We gave him a better world," she said. Henri's arm tightened around her. "You gave it to me first." She smiled, eyes glistening in the soft glow of evening. "Then keep it safe, Henri. Always." He kissed her forehead, a gesture as sacred as any vow. Always. And as the stars scattered over Paris, the press continued to hum, turning words into ink, ink into truth, and truth into legacy. A legacy not of power nor of redemption, but of love that refused to die, even when the world insisted it should. The river, steady and endless, whispered its song below the bridges, and above it, two names gleamed side by side, shining against the night. Rousseau-Beaumont, proof that even the deepest wounds could one day become a story of light. And so, dear listener, our journey with Madeleine Rousseau and Henri Beaumont comes to its close, not in tragedy, but in triumph. A triumph not shouted from rooftops, but whispered through time, through every act of forgiveness, every choice to rebuild instead of retreat. Their story reminds us that love, true love, is not born from perfection. It rises from the ashes of pain, it heals what pride destroys, and it teaches us that redemption is never beyond reach. Henri and Madeleine discovered that what is written in ink can fade, but what is written in the heart endures forever. They stood against a society that believed in appearances more than truth, and in doing so, they proved something timeless, that courage and compassion can rewrite destiny itself. If this story touched you, if at any moment you found yourself believing in second chances, in healing, or in the power of quiet, enduring love, tell me in the comments below. What did you feel when Madeleine finally chose love over bitterness? When Henri learned that forgiveness is the most powerful form of strength? And to know who stayed until the very end of this tale, I want you to write a single word in the comments. Ink. Because just like ink, love leaves a mark that no time can erase. If you wish to support the small team that brings these emotional journeys to life, you can send us super thanks on YouTube with whatever amount feels right for you. Every gesture, no matter how small, helps us continue creating stories that move hearts across the world. And if supporting financially isn't possible right now, you can still make a difference. Simply share this story with someone who believes in the kind of love that survives storms and scandal. Let them feel what you just felt. Thank you for being part of this experience, for every minute you listened, for every emotion you felt, and for walking beside Madeleine and Henri through their years of redemption. Stay with us, because in the stories you'll find on the cards above, more hearts await their moment of truth, their chance to begin again, and perhaps to write their own love in ink.